Hi, guys. This is the Motivity Podcast with Danielle. First of all, thanks for listening. Thanks for checking in. We have an exciting topic for today. We are talking all things security. We have Alec Leeson on. He's a system architect from Cisco, comes with a wealth of knowledge. But from a high-level standpoint, we're going to talk about, granular control, really clamping down early and what's in the enterprise and how do you do that, right? How do you look at a tiered approach? We're also going to really focus on vulnerabilities in the marketplace and how much data actually hits the internet. Why, do you have old devices versus new devices? What can hackers hack into? And then at the end of the day, we're going to just talk about some advice we're going to give to, that home worker or that end user, just, going on the internet and browsing. And when you're going to a Starbucks or you're going anywhere to work, why is so important, and some lessons that we can, or advice that we could give you. Because we don't want anybody to get hacked. We want no breaches. We want everything secure. But that's hard to live in this world and do that. But we're going to give you some great advice here. And so, Alec, thanks for being on the show. You want to say hi real quick? Tell us a little about yourself.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here, Danielle. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
So I'm Alec Leeson. I'm a security architect at Cisco. But more than that, I'm a bit of a technologist. I got into this field because I just love seeing how technology works, understanding all the different moving parts. I mean, it's a large space being in technology. And security is a really interesting way to see how that technology is used in ways that it's not necessarily designed to or intended to. I have a pleasure of being part of the assessment and penetration team here at Cisco. What we do is
tell everybody what you do.
We play the bad guy.
It's a little scary what he does.
We love what we do. We actually go out to Cisco's customers and partners, and we engage with them to hack into their companies, be it breaking into their servers, hacking into their computers, sending malicious emails, writing malware, hacking into cars, devices, even breaking into buildings. We do this with our customers so we can help them learn to respond when the actual bad guys are doing the attacking, figure out where their weak points are, how we can help them build their defenses. So we get to have a lot of fun in a variety of different industries across many different technologies.
Yeah, Alex, so you talked about, going into these client and these enterprises. Give some advice. If someone's just, tuning in and listening, what's advice that you could give, a director of IT or a CISO to think about when they're really architecting out security? What's the number one thing you learn, and I'm sure you get in, right? You go in with the goal to get into the network, but what advice can you give for someone listening?
Sure. So I think there's a few big things. First, very generically, defense in depth. You don't want to have just a single layer of security. Oftentimes, security at organizations is a lot like an M&M. It's got a nice hard shell on the outside, but once you get inside, it melts in your mouth. So security at organizations tend to be like that. You need layers upon layers of security. You need to assume that threats can come from anywhere, because they can. Another big piece, touching on some more modern aspects of attacks and technology, is user and password security. Making sure that you're using things like multifactor authentication.
What does that mean, though?
Make it
what is multifactor? Yeah. And some people may know because they go to websites, or, obviously we know working inside of a large corporation, right? But explain what that is.
Sure. So oftentimes it comes across as a headache to most people. Your company tells you you need to get an app on your phone. You have a physical token. You get a text message and you have to enter a code after your username and password before you can log into your bank, before you can log into your email. And while this might seem like additional steps, it is the best way to protect against people stealing your password and using it in malicious ways. A common thing that happens is what we call password reuse. People use the same password everywhere, for their bank, for their work.
How bad is that, Alec? I tell all my friends, you need to have a password keeper or use, these big box companies, right, that have built-in security measures. Like, do not use, don't save your password in a note. Don't write it down in your notebook at home. Please, I preach this, but please tell people why. Why is just, some crazy password good for, all different websites? Not one, many different.
Yeah. In an ideal world, you would use a different password for absolutely everything, and you would still have multi-factor authentication.
Correct.
Because then if somebody steals your password, two things happen. One, they can't use it in multiple places. If they steal your password, you only use it for one place, that's all they can get to. But if you have multi-factor authentication, then even if they steal your password, they still can't get in because you'll be able to tell that they're trying to. So it goes back to having these layers of security. And even for anybody, even those who don't work in the technical space, having a different password for everything, having multi-factor authentication, might add an extra step, but it'll give you that reassurance that nobody's going to break into your bank account. Nobody's going to get into your email because you have additional protection.
And talk about that from, a corporation standpoint. You spoke about having one password to access, a data file. Talk about how important that is not everyone knowing that password, and maybe you can relate it to an enterprise too.
Absolutely. Because when you have a shared password like that, you really lose control over who can get access to something. You can be an organization with very strict controls and user groups and Active Directory. You've got limitations on who can access what, and you think that those policies are being followed so that you can go and audit them and say, hey, the right people have the right access and that's it. But if people are sharing passwords, sharing accounts, you lose that visibility and that control over who's accessing what service. And then what happens when an employee leaves the company? If you don't know that that password is being shared, they keep that access after they leave. They can come back in and do who knows what. So sharing passwords is definitely an anti-pattern, but unfortunately, it's something that's still really common.
Yeah, it's interesting that you don't even think about that the employee leaves, works for another company. Now that they could get in, maybe they have a bad taste in their mouth about the corporation. You probably, when you're going on site, you probably see those little nuances. And those are the little pieces that having, I guess, a team like yourself to come in and check, hey, this is not good, or this is not working, or these files shouldn't be here, right? What other advice could you give, from that level, right, that you see that we make a lot of mistakes at? I mean, Cisco doesn't, but Cisco probably does. I don't want to say we don't, but a corporation does, right? What are those fixes or things to look out for, right?
Yeah, the landscape has definitely changed over the past few years with such a large push to work from home, kind of like this hybrid workforce. A lot of people are going to remain working from home. And when that happens, companies start to lose a little bit of that visibility into what devices are where. Where are you accessing from? What kind of device are you accessing from? Before the pandemic, this was a hot topic with bring your own device. People bringing their own cell phones and iPads into the office, connecting it to the corporate Wi-Fi. So it's hard nowadays to maintain strict controls on what devices are where. So zero trust is a phrase that's become incredibly popular. Really, that just means that from a company's perspective, anytime anybody logs in from anywhere, assume that it's malicious. Don't trust the device it's coming from. Don't trust the network it's coming from. And if you take that posture, then you'll be better prepared to handle situations when an account passwords are stolen, people try to break in. Well, you're not trusting any devices or user accounts anyway. So you're better prepared to prevent that from escalating to something truly dangerous.
Yeah, it's hard to think about because you do lose so much control, right? So how do you see, how do you really start implementing zero trust? Do you start from the endpoint? Do you think about what hits the internet? Where do you start with that strategy?
Yeah, endpoints, networks, and user accounts. The big thing, that first step, I know we touched on it already, is that multi-factor authentication.
Yep. Right.
Knowing that you're protecting your users as much as you're protecting the technology that they're using is really, really important. Because, not every company can have a extensive VPN infrastructure, work from home, personal devices that they could ship out to grant access to a corporate network that are secured. Sometimes you have applications that, are business-like, Outlook Webmail, that you can just log into. So that is a really important first step. And when you do step up to use something like a VPN, making sure that you're using its features to do device health checks, that you're doing network protections as well. If you have employee laptops or corporate laptops that the employees are using, making sure that they have antivirus, that they are checking the health of the networks they're connecting to, and placing appropriate restrictions based on what's going on there.
Alec, I couldn't even imagine being in a CIO's, desk, but, I guess where do you start, right? Do you start with VPN? Where do you start? Do you start at that level looking at the best software to protect your end users, like knowing that they're on the road, they're going to be connecting from anywhere? Do you start at the cell phone device? Like, where would you even start looking? And maybe what software would you recommend to give examples?
Yeah. So where I would start would be the employee workstation.
Okay.
If they're not going to be in the office, that's the one thing that the company will really have the most control over before they ship it out. They can install what software they need. They can have the VPN set up. They can have, the multifactor. Everything can be tuned
so you
to a company
could load everything on your computer, ideally, and then ship that computer home to that end user. So in your mind, that device is protected, right, from getting any kind of malicious software on it because you have that wall built up, right? Maybe.
Exactly. But ideally, that's the hope. That's what we're trying to accomplish.
Right.
And the second part of that, as you touched on, Danielle, is the phones.
Right.
Figuring out a strategy for this, either bring your own device or company phone.
What do you think is better?
If you want to, well, from a purely security perspective,
purely security, not a functional.
You order a phone. The company, you will take the time to install the right software, limit what apps can be installed, do all the monitoring, remote wiping of devices if you lose it. All these things can be added before you send that phone to your employees. That is the best way to do it. But in security, it's often a trade-off between being secure and being convenient. And it's a long spectrum.
That is a good point.
It can be cheaper.
Don't hinder my work. Don't make my cell phone right behind software upgrades or my applications wouldn't work. So I think that is a fine line that you kind of have to walk as a business owner, that you want to keep it open, but you got to keep it secure. So how do you do that? Because I want a work-life balance here. I don't want to be against all these walls and I can't talk to my friends anywhere. I can't use applications to, chat. Kind of give advice there of how someone would go about having that open network or that open communication device.
Yeah, and thankfully, phones nowadays are getting better at allowing you to segregate your work and everything else on a single device. I personally have an Android phone, and it has work mode, where you press a button, all of your work apps turn off. Cisco can tell me what apps I'm allowed to have on my phone under my work profile, and it does a whole bunch right from a security perspective. But at the end of the workday or at the end of the work week, I can hit a button, turn off all those apps, and it's just my personal phone. Don't get the notifications anymore, but it still has an enclave, a secure segment where the company can put these additional restrictions in place. If you open a link from your work email, it goes to the work web browser, not just your phone's web browser. So that allows for a nice middle ground of that user freedom and bring your own device while still having control over employee devices.
So is that an applied policy that's already in our phones now? I have seen the sleep one, but I didn't realize that if you hit the work one, that it actually can either activate or deactivate, the applications that we use every day, like IM or email or WebEx, right? These Teams platforms that we communicate on. That's what's happening?
Yes. And so from what we saw at Cisco it was as part of the enrollment process for a mobile device, because it's not just sign into your work email. You have to get the VPN installed. You have to get a few apps installed, set up your company as an administrator for your phone so they can do some of these admin things. And it was part of that process that all this was configured. And I really didn't have to do much. It was between Cisco and my phone, made all that magic happen.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't even realize that. I saw the functionality. I didn't realize the functionality actually can activate or deactivate applications. It's quite interesting that we have that level of functionality now, and that it could force you to the work URL, or it could force you, to look at the internet this way. It's pretty powerful. We talk a lot, and that goes into segmentation. We talk a lot about segmenting out networks. So let's go into like OIT devices. I communicate a lot and we strategize a lot about all OIT devices, right? Any device that needs internet access, which is a ton. And what I see a lot is that all these devices have different software levels, and we're trying to tackle this strategy. But one of the hard parts is that no one understands where to start or where to begin. So talk a little bit about why devices need internet access, what you recommend from a security layer there.
Sure. And yeah, IoT is really the new frontier.
It is.
We're seeing a lot of really cool things, but also a lot of really scary things. And it really kind of falls into two buckets, right? Is a company pursuing IoT and consumers who are picking up these devices and bringing them into their homes. And as we mentioned earlier, it's a trade-off between being secure and having conveniences. So that's what you're sacrificing by bringing IoT into your home, is you're taking a little bit of your privacy away. You're granting some device access to the internet, but hopefully you're getting some cool things out of it. And you can turn your lights on and off with your voice, setting reminders if you're making some tea, connecting your TVs to the internet to stream the latest shows. IoT makes all of this possible. And it is a security risk too, though.
Why is it a security risk, Alec? Come on, I'm just connecting, to Nest, and I'm connecting, I'm watching Netflix. Like, I don't know, I connect to Amazon in my device. Like, why should I be worried?
Yeah, well, because a pipe travels both ways. If you're connecting one that goes outside of your home, that means theoretically something can come inside of your home. And so you are granting that access, or you have one of these devices where you can give voice commands. Well, that's not being processed on your device. That's being processed at a company. It's reaching out to the cloud. It's sending that data across, then processing it and giving you a response. So there's already data coming in as well as what's going out. And that's why it's a security risk. And not all companies, not all IoT devices have security at top of mind.
Correct.
These are the ones. And
companies don't. Like actual companies that we all work with and you see and you read about, they don't have the policies built in to their infrastructure or the data point. So that's a really key piece.
Yeah, and it really is, because one small flaw can lead to a huge disaster, such as 2016. There was the Mirai botnet, as it was called, and this consisted of some hackers who found a way to exploit a lot of these IoT devices that were inappropriately exposed to the internet and were not designed very strongly, sharing really poor default passwords and admin credentials. So these developers were able to create malware and a worm that was able to spread between these devices. And then at the drop of a hat, they were able to point all these devices at websites like Netflix, and were able to take them offline by just pointing all these devices in one place and saying, spam them with data and let's see what happens. So it's possible for this exploitation to happen, and it has occurred already.
Alec, what would happen if this happens? Like, what happens to me as an end user at home if I got hit with malware like that?
Well, there's a few different things that attackers do when they are targeting these devices. One, they're looking just for a platform to launch attacks against others. From a consumer perspective, this doesn't impact you directly as much, but something on your Wi-Fi can then be used to attack somebody else. And that's never a cool thing. But there are instances where it could be turned against you and your household too. This actually happened to Amazon's Ring several years ago, where these smart cameras and smart home security devices were compromised. 30 individuals between 15 families reported hackers breaking into their devices and talking to them and harassing them inside their own homes because of insecure use of IoT. So this has happened, and there are real-world consequences to it.
But Alec, how would I know if a Nest, or Amazon now, has security built in? How would I even understand that from, even an end user, right? Even from what I bring in my home, I have kids. I wouldn't want someone to hack or get into any of my cameras or in my household. How would I know that that company has security built in or not? Is there any way to answer that, or, no, I guess?
It comes down to trust. And so the recommendation there is stick to companies that you do trust. Larger companies like Amazon will have security teams and developers and engineers in place that are ready to very quickly respond to emerging threats, able to push out updates, are able to tackle these types of challenges. But with IoT devices, it's a lot like fast fashion, and fast technology, where people are, hey, they've got an idea, and they can go and buy components for very cheap and create new devices and turn around and start to sell them. They do some cool things, but because these are smaller companies doing very fast engineering development, they're not in a position to support these devices as well, and they might not be thinking of security. So before you bring one of these devices into your home, do the due diligence of learning about the product a little bit, learn about the company who makes it, and decide if this is a company that you would trust.
Or like you're saying, do a sandbox, right? Test the unit, right? Maybe, not that you can hack it and we're not hackers, but you can read about it. You can see if they've had security breaches. That information is public. So maybe that's some good advice. Also, there's privacy settings. There's certain settings that you got to look at. You got to dig a little deep. Like there's security built into these bigger companies. You just kind of have to look for it sometimes, right? I mean, I do it a lot. I mean, just because, we're techies and we look for the nuances, right? I look for what's talking to what applications are sharing information, shutting them down. I don't know. These are just kind of some of the best practices that I use as an individual, but.
Yeah, and I'm on an extreme end of that too, right? I'm in the tech space. I work for Cisco. So, of course, I have a separate Wi-Fi altogether for my IoT devices.
Oh,
and
that's
so I
interesting.
only let talk my personal devices exactly what I specify. And then I watch what's leaving my home Wi-Fi, going out to the public internet, as well as what's coming in, so I can keep tabs on what's expected behavior versus what's unexpected. But again, that's an extreme end. But that might be a path as well. Isolate these devices from the rest of your laptops and phones and iPads.
So you're technically segmenting your house network, which is actually really smart. Right. So you're putting devices that are all the same into one, category, and then you're taking all the rest of the devices. What about my kid's tablet or my iPad? Is there security built in from that level, or do you think that they should also be, not connected maybe to your home Wi-Fi where the TVs are connected, or do you plug them all into the same category?
Devices like, iPads and tablets and phones, I put in the same bucket as, computers and laptops and things like that. You get the same exposing them to IoT devices as you would anything else. But yeah, I would lump them more in that category of your other personal internet devices.
What about,
and there are security built in.
There are, again, big company. But what about from some policies that you could build into your home? I don't want my kids going to certain applications. I don't want my kids watching that. What can I do from that level? And who has products like that from a home user?
Well, there's a few different ways that you can approach a problem like that. The device itself, where they'll have parental control settings, you can block websites, you can block apps, you can have different profiles. So you can have a kid's profile, your personal profile on your phone. One of the horror stories is if you hand your kid a phone, your work phone, because they can play a game, are they going to start responding to your emails on accident? So there's ways
I hope
that you can put some control.
No, I'm totally kidding, but technically.
And the other approach is from the Wi-Fi side.
Right.
You can put parental controls and limits on your Wi-Fi router. When you're setting up your Wi-Fi, when you're connecting to the internet, Whether your internet service provider has a nice website for you to adjust these rules, you can put limitations and restrictions on what devices are connecting, what they're allowed to do, how often they're allowed to use the internet. Can you set a bedtime for your iPad? Absolutely, you can. So there are many ways that you can go about that.
And, you know, thinking about these on the scale of your home is probably a lot easier, right? But now you put that CIO hat on, or that enterprise hat of that company, and now you could understand the scale of devices hitting that network and all the nuances they have to think about. Obviously, you know, they have, and I guess maybe it's money to spend on some of these, you know, these policies and procedures and software that you can, you know, institute. But the magnitude is huge, right? Like, talk about more of the devices that hit the internet. You talked about the car. Gave me a great example about the car example. Can we go into that for a second?
Absolutely. So cars and security, and it's a little known to people outside of the tech industry and automotive industry that a lot of cars have cell phones built into them. Not ones that you can use as an owner of a car, but they send data back to the manufacturer to give information how your engine's doing, to give you all these cool features like connecting your phone to their app, you know, opening your car doors, turning it on remotely, getting the heaters going in the winter, some really cool things.
By the way, I have a Volvo, and my favorite feature is turning my car on and autonomous driving, but I just had to plug that because I love my Volvo. But I know it's sending a lot of data. I also know in the back of my mind, I'm sending a lot of information about where I drive, how the car is driving, right? Like you said.
Exactly. And as these cars get more advanced and are doing more things, they're sending more data back home. And actually...
Are they going over the public internet then?
In some cases.
Right.
You know, oftentimes what's happening is these cars are reaching out, you know, to a cellular network, right? Like a cell phone, it connects and it needs to send data somewhere. Well, a lot of companies are now using the cloud as the place to send that data because it scales really well. You can be geo-specific about it. You can have cars connect to West Coast, East Coast, Europe, and things like that, instead of having to try to phone home to your one data center that you have sitting somewhere. So that's a very common way for communications to occur. And sometimes they just say, well, we're connecting over cellular, right? That's going to be secure enough. And it goes back to defense in depth and layering security. The ideal is to have everything encrypted, have security from the moment your data leaves the car. But there are ways that attackers can kind of get in between that communication. And in 2015, this happened. Some researchers did this to a Jeep, where they got in the middle of that communication. When the Jeep was trying to perform a software update, they put their own update in its place. And after this malicious update was installed, they were able to control the car from a laptop remotely. They can make it speed up, slow down, veer off the road even, just leveraging the technology that was in the car. And this is in 2015. It's almost a decade ago already. It's scary to think. So there is a risk of these devices connecting to the internet, even things like cars. But thankfully, those lessons have been learned, and companies are very, they really do keep that top of mind. That's not the thing that they want to have pop up in the headlines is, a car driven off road by a hacker. So there are things in place to fix that nowadays.
Alec, talk about the power of the cloud. You spoke a little bit about it, and maybe some best practices for companies moving to the cloud, have a cloud first strategy. What advice can you give there? It is a big landscape. We know moving all applications inside an enterprise is a very big task. It's a hard task, right? But what advice can you give there from a security standpoint to maybe get them thinking about that prior to the move?
Sure. So the cloud does change many things. And there sometimes is a bit of a misconception that moving to the cloud removes your need to think about security very much. It changes how you have to think about security, but it does not remove that altogether. That's something we call the shared responsibility model, is that when you go to a cloud provider, they take some of those risks off your hands.
100%.
But there's still others that you can fall into. And it can be daunting for a company moving to the cloud to really get a sense of what they want to do, how they want to migrate, how do they use it properly? So a few pieces of recommendations I can give there are to have a plan, first and foremost. You need to bring all the right people to the table. It's, IT, development and security and operations. You need to bring, some of your business leaders in and stakeholders. Really have to set up a center of excellence for the cloud. So that way you have the right stakeholders in the room, that you can come to decisions together, that you can make sure you're not overlapping responsibilities, and then start putting together a plan. But you don't want to spend too much time planning. We see a lot of our customers getting into analysis paralysis, where they just want to keep looking at data. They want to come up with a perfect plan before they do anything. But after you start to put together a plan, you need to get out there. You need to get into the cloud. Maybe not the full migration effort, maybe just a sandbox at first, where you cherry pick a few development teams. You give all your stakeholders in the center of excellence some access as well, and you learn. You make mistakes. You figure out what is the best plan for you. How do you segregate your applications and do segmentation in the cloud? How do you expose services and websites and other applications to the internet? How do you communicate from your on-premises networks to the cloud environment? So take the time to learn with a sandbox. And after you learn, start from scratch. Use that learning experience to build and make your plan robust before you start the key migration. And it will save you many headaches, so you don't have to do double re-engineering later down the road as you discover a new security policy you should have put in place at the beginning.
Right. And it even goes to, we always hear a lot that moving to the cloud have a better ROI. That's only going to be a good ROI if these policies, like if it's implemented properly. If it's done right, yes, it can definitely save you money, or you'll have better agility, or, you need to scale from a network standpoint or a data center perspective. Yes, those things are, you can accomplish them. But like Alex saying, start small, make mistakes, go through training, listen to all of your providers, all of the thought leadership from these big corporations, because we have already done it. We've done it. We're here. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that, what Cisco does, but, obviously we have a big cloud initiative here. So.
Absolutely. And one last piece of advice there is that users really do have to come first. And we touched on this at the beginning of the show.
We did.
Multifactor authentication, how defending your users is important. Because when you move to the cloud, users and internal users as much as the end users become very, very important, because the cloud gives a lot of power to your engineers and employees. Everything's self-service in the cloud. You click a few buttons to get some new servers. So protecting your users is definitely key, and making sure that the appropriate restrictions and policies are in place, not to grant too much power where it's not needed, can prevent some headaches. And these are the types of things that our team at Cisco can really help with. And some of the things that we've done in the past, we've gone in and done pen tests of applications, where we try and break into cloud applications that are publicly exposed. We try and attack users on the inside. We'll spray passwords, try and see where we can get access without having to do anything. There's many, many things that can be done from a security perspective.
This landscape keeps growing. The products keep getting better, right? There's more knowledge. But again, you have to ask the right questions. You got to have the right people giving you advice. And Alec, do you agree with the thought that you should talk to a multitude of companies, not just the big four, or, maybe just Amazon or just Microsoft? Do you feel like it's better to get thought leadership even from the manufacturers?
Yes, because each cloud provider, different types of controls, what products are compatible with it. One of the key steps that's early in the cloud migration process is to do dependency mapping. Figure out what services you're using. What code does it need? What software as a service solutions are you using? If you pay for a lot of SaaS solutions that are in a single cloud environment, well, maybe you want to learn and lean towards that cloud environment to make that interoperability a little bit more efficient. Figure out what types of security controls you want to have in place. What other services might you already be using from one of these cloud providers? So you absolutely want to experiment with all of them. and even the technologies that you can use within them. Things like containers and Kubernetes are a hot topic, different ways to package and deploy your code. And by taking a look at these different technologies, if you're going to be doing some re-engineering, really having good insight into what you're going to be doing and why is key, depending on what your goals are. Because maybe you want to use multiple cloud environments. Maybe you want to move entirely to the cloud. Maybe you want a hybrid cloud where you're still leveraging some on-premises servers. So really having a picture and trying them out is key.
Yeah, definitely. Trying it out, see what works, see what's connected, what's not connected, what makes sense in the cloud, right? All those factors, cost comes in, operational excellence comes in. We think about all these pieces and getting, like, Alec is saying, the more advice, the better, right? Listen to thought leadership, have experts that understand different parts of the business, not just security, not just networking. You need everybody there. You need everyone at the table.
You do. And you need as many different perspectives as you can get. Because it's all this feedback that's coming in from your own teams, from external sources that really help you put that robust plan together. You can't leave out the networking team because they're going to have insights into how you want to group and segment these technologies. You don't want to leave out the security team because then you might be introducing vulnerabilities into the environment. You don't want to leave out development teams because they know what their capabilities are, and you need to understand how much retraining needs to be done to prepare your entire organization for the cloud.
Alec, we have so much of a security landscape, right? Security thought leadership goes into, applications or companies and software and so on and so forth. What advice would you give someone coming into the tech field? Would you recommend them going into the security layer? Maybe, where would they start, right? If they just wanted to learn more about the security openings or security jobs or the security technology field.
Sure. There's many different places that you can start, and a lot of it is free, surprisingly enough. There's endless tutorials on YouTube. There's companies that put out applications and websites that are intentionally vulnerable to attacks, so you can practice legally. You can do it off of your own computer. Things like OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project, has a number of tutorials, a number of vulnerable applications you can practice on. There's certifications as well across the spectrum. There's a lot of the very common ones you see are Security Plus. One of my favorites is the Offensive Security Certified Professional, or OSCP, which is a rigorous course, but it'll ramp you up from knowing a little bit of tech to how to conduct a penetration test and how to write a report in it, leveraging business skills as well as the technical skills. But if there's one thing, it's just be interested.
Yeah.
There's so many different things in security. You can spend entire careers looking at just networks, just applications, just the cloud, just IoT, just hardware. So keeping an open mind and checking out these different areas and find what interests you, because there's going to be jobs available for all these different categories. If you like websites, look at website security. Maybe 20, 30 years ago, there was an expectation that security professionals needed to be the jack of all trades and understand development and understand networking and understand hardware all at the same time. But with how broad of a field technology is today, that's not the case.
Right.
So find what you like, what you find interesting, and pursue that.
It's great advice. Like, you could make it relatable. Think about your iPhone. You're an end user. Do you like, think about what part of the security landscape that maybe you like or you want to research about. You could kind of think about your home environment, and then obviously for enterprise, a grand scale. So that is great advice. There's different pillars within the security landscape. And there's a lot that you can do. Young people coming into the marketplace, we need a ton of people in the security landscape. It's the number one field that companies are hiring for. But as Alex saying, there's so many different parts to it. So find, maybe you could find one that interests you. I think that's great advice. In regards to the websites you just mentioned, make sure that you send them to me. Ping them to me. I'll put them in the notes section. So if anyone's looking to get into the security field, you can check those websites out, kind of play with them. Again, maybe trying to find the silo that you're interested in. I think that's such great advice. the security landscape is growing. My customers, what I hear a lot is I can't keep up. There's so much information out there. And you got to be a knowledgeable end user, whether, you're talking about your home or working for a company, have some insight, into this landscape. Alec, we have a couple minutes left. Any last words of advice? This was great. I feel like this is relatable, to so many people and so many levels, just the way that you're thinking about things and approaches. It's very broad. So, any last things or any last advice you want to give?
Sure. And advice that I hate to give, but be a little bit cynical when it comes to technology. Think about when you're using technology, especially in a new environment, what type of information are you giving away? If you're taking a laptop or a phone into a coffee shop and connecting to their internet, you have to think a little bit about who might be on that internet as well. What might they be trying to do? Because technology risk is really about exposure. How much you're exposing to somebody else that they could leverage in a really nasty way. So limiting your exposure is the best mindset to be in when considering security risks and how to be safer in everyday life. So, using a password manager, a different password for everything, multi-factor authentication, take the hassle on, and accept it a little bit because it really does keep you safe. And just think about exposure when you do something new regarding technology.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And that's a good mindset to have. Keep the exposure as close as you can. And so, Alec, thank you so much for being on this call. We'll probably do a part 2. Maybe we'll just focus on one of those silos that you spoke about. Again, if you want to get into the security industry, Alec gave great websites that, you could just start looking at and playing with, and it really will start opening your mind and start building that foundation and building blocks, that keep us up at night, or again, as Alex said, they come in and try to hack us all, and see if we'll click on these malicious websites. But there's so much here, there's so much to learn, and we need a lot of people in this industry. So thank you, Alec, so much for joining the podcast today. We're going to sign off. Again, this is the Motivity Podcast with Danielle, and we'll include all the notes and all the information in the notes section. Subscribe to this show. Don't forget, please. You can find us on wherever you listen to your podcasts. And again, this is Danielle signing off. Have a great day.